Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 171, The Hunt. I didn't expect them to have hundreds of weak mana hearts they were willing to trade for our assistance, I said as we walked behind another of the Silent Ones. My first assumption that the Silent Ones were some weird harem was proven wildly inaccurate with this one, seeing as he was a man. Then again, I didn't know how this society operated, maybe they swung both ways. Who was I to judge? That's because you get too defensive, Fiona added flatly. Martin told me an interesting saying, you catch more flies with honey. I grunted, I'm familiar with it. I just don't like being lied to and manipulated. Nor do I, but you should still try to be nicer to people, at least when Martin or I am not here to smooth things over for you. I couldn't deny that, but I wasn't opening up to people I hardly knew anymore. Not after what happened with Javier. Once bitten twice shy, so to speak. I knew I was being obstinate, but it kept my friends from being hurt. I was fine with alienating others. But this situation was Fiona's choice, so I would support her. The Silent One came to a halt and motioned toward a faded line running through the cobblestone street. I walked over to see what he was pointing out. It reminded me of those dividing lines some cities used to have to tell you that you stepped across some imaginary point into the next country over. There was a slight curve to the construction and it took me a bit to estimate the size of the circle. A rough estimate put it in the 500-meter range. It was in rough shape as thousands of years of wear and tear had worn away at the enchantment. What I saw, I couldn't make heads or tails of. For one, enchanting was more geometric design than the flowing style that runic design contained. Sure, I could have some geometric stylization in my designs, but that was mainly for separating the runic components. Enchantment reminded me more of a complex mandala made from intersecting straight lines and a magical script that I couldn't even begin to understand. And this was one of the working sections of the city. I couldn't imagine how bad off the broken sections had become. We had only come here to see where the working locations were, and Fiona thought I might be able to fix some to give us a better chance at trapping the spirit. I stood up and shook my head. There isn't anything I can do. Even if I understood this mess, I said, gesturing to the ground, it's too damaged to know where to begin. The hard way it is then, Fiona said as if she had expected this outcome from the start. So you do have a plan? Nope, not really, she replied. I stopped. What do you mean, nope? Fiona came to a stop and turned to face me, then she shrugged. Hard to plan for something you've never encountered. Then how do you figure to pull this off? I asked in astonishment. Well, first we need to check the rest of these enchantment circles. Then we need to see if we can intercept the shadow spirit before it strikes again. Depending on how it reacts, then we can plan, or we can fight it until it makes a mistake and enters one of the zones. I pinched the bridge of my nose and sighed, fine, but I may be able to increase our chances to make this work. She winked at me. I thought you might have something up your sleeve. Yeah, let's just get these sites checked out, and I'll work on seeing if my idea is feasible or not. I grunted in annoyance as she smiled and turned around, hurrying after our guide. I didn't particularly like being put on the spot to save these people, but I had been thinking over the issue since the chief told us about it. It wouldn't be the first time I had created something that affected spirits. This would be on a much larger scale though. While we walked, my mind began to go through dozens of possible runic combinations and designs for an item that could help in this situation. Materials would be slim picking, but the items didn't need to last long once they were powered up. The problem I was having was if they would have an adverse effect on the Silent Ones, or even worse, the sleeping spirits. Fixing the enchantment circles or creating new ones using runes would be the best outcome, but I had neither the time nor incentive to go that far. Another idea popped into my head and I smiled. I think I could help Fiona with this spirit capture as well as the town, without too much effort. Muget rode with me out to the fortress while Fiona stayed behind in Huron. With my staff, she didn't have much to worry about if the spirit attacked her, but I needed my workroom to complete the needed items. I had to stop Muget from approaching too close as I dismounted from the horse and deactivated the defenses. How does something so large and heavy fly? He asked, getting his first up-close look at the fortress. Magic, I replied simply, giving him a smirk. The man looked back at me with a deadpan face. Well, I thought it was funny. It's enchanted, but that's as much information as I am willing to disclose. Very well, and you are sure it can make it back to the city quicker than the horses? He asked, eyeing the fortress skeptically. Yup, it may not be as fast as a horse at full gallop, but it doesn't get tired. Here, store the horses in this, I said, tossing him the storage item I used to keep Bella in. He easily snatched it from the air and looked at it in confusion. It's like a storage ring but safe to hold animals. Ah, he said simply, getting off his horse and touching it to the item. Both creatures disappeared into the ring. How long can they remain inside? He asked. As long as you add food and water, they can remain inside indefinitely. Although they still age, and it's not really good for their temperament to leave them cooped up too long. A few days shouldn't hurt them though. Very well, Muget replied, joining me on the ramp and following me inside. Muget had been understandably nervous about flying, but he got over most of that fear and asked me questions about the fortress. I didn't answer most of them, seeing as I hardly knew the guy. After a while, he gave up and the rest of the trip was a silent endeavor. I parked the fortress a few hundred yards from the city wall and Muget disembarked. After he was gone, I headed up to my workshop and got to work building the devices to help Fiona. The first ones were simple, just a small device that emitted an aura more annoying than harmful to spirits. It was based on the design of my weapon but in an expanded aura form rather than concentrated for attacking. When activated, it would cover about 100-foot radius for about 3 days before the runes burned themselves out. If I were using mithril for the runic pathways, the devices would last for years, but this was fast, dirty, and cheap. I made 24 of the devices with the scrap metals I had within the fortress. The goal was to surround one of the active enchantment circles with them, forcing the creature to flee in that direction. They were set up with a simple remote activation rune, similar to what I used on my barge keys. This way they could all be activated or deactivated at the same time. The last item was a bit more complex. And I did use mithril in its construction. It was disguised as a simple lantern, mimicking the ones I had seen people carrying around Huron. It worked along the same principle as the gem Fiona was trapped inside. But it could only draw elemental spirits to it, to trap them within, and it would automatically release them when the person carrying the lantern entered one of the active enchantment circles within the city. Since spirits were mostly hidden from human eyes, anyone carrying the lantern would not suspect a thing. It would just be one more lantern among dozens of others that the city watch carried on their nightly patrols. Although, for it to work, they would have to unknowingly get within 100 feet of an untethered spirit. I only had the materials for 2 of these lanterns on hand, so it would have to do. I got to work laying the mithril pathways on the 2 lanterns I borrowed. I wasn't going to tell the chief about this item because I didn't want him hounding me to make more for the city. Perhaps if friendly relations were set up between St. June and Huron, some sort of trade agreement could be made. Lord knows they had a plentiful supply of mana hearts to trade. I had asked the chief about those. Apparently, they grew in the hot springs near the city. Harvesting them wasn't a high priority for the city though, as they grew extremely slowly in the waters. It could sometimes take 2 to 5 years to produce one that could hold more than 50 mana. All the ones he promised Fiona and me for this work were even smaller, holding between 20 and 25 mana. Essentially useless for most things. But I knew how to combine them to get a much more useful sized mana heart. I had always wondered about mana hearts. The only ones I had come across had been in dungeon bosses. If that's the only place they spawned, magical gear would be even more overpriced than it was now. But finding out there were naturally occurring mana hearts made much more sense. Making a good impression and scooping up a lucrative trade agreement would be my top priority for Martin when we returned. I couldn't let a resource like this escape my grasp or let the Enchanters Guild know about it. It's one of the main reasons I agreed to go along with Fiona's reckless plan. I quickly finished up my work and inspected the lanterns. I had 3 but only 2 were modified and I couldn't see any difference in the items. The runes were hidden along with the mithril pathways. Whether they would work, I couldn't say. I knew they should work based on my knowledge of runes, but it was not always a guarantee. The lanterns also acted as a backup in case the first plan had unintended side effects. I returned to the city to find Fiona. When I caught up to her, she looked tired. "What happened to you?" I asked in concern. "Oh, not much. I managed to catch up with the spirit and it was angry about my meddling. We fought for a bit before I pulled out the weapon you gave me, then it fled. I've been trying to track it down ever since." "Wait, so you haven't slept in 3 days?" She shook her head in reply. "Go get some sleep in the fortress. I got some things to help with the hunt, but I need you rested before I try and deploy them." "All right, I'll see you in 8 hours, she replied tiredly. Chapter 172, Elusive Catch. After Fiona woke up, we spread out and deployed the spirit repellers around the last reported location of someone going missing. It wasn't close to one of the working enchantment circles, but it would let us know if the items worked. We met back up after a few hours. You ready? I asked. Let me get a bird's eye view, she said before turning invisible and floating into the air. I gave her a few minutes to get set before I activated the devices. I didn't have to wait long before a spine-chilling screech tore through the buildings around me. There was a flash of liquid darkness as it tore out of the alley and rushed toward me. Without my weapon, I had no way of harming the spirit, so I leaped into the air, activating my wings and quickly flapping backward until I was within the safety of my repulsion field. The creature let out another baleful scream as it contacted the field and vanished into a nearby shadow. I landed back in the street and looked around to see if anyone had witnessed our test. It seemed nobody was dumb enough to hang around outside at night, which was good. I was about to deem the test a success when I heard the same scream but from farther off within the city. There was a thump as Fiona sat down next to me and became visible. It escaped the cordon. We have to hurry and reset it. I nodded. I turned off the field. Quickly collect your devices and redeploy them. We both rushed off to retrieve the items. If I had just used the lantern, this would be over already, but I didn't want to tip my hand and let these people know I could make items of that nature. Not until I knew them better. My hope was the spirit would be gunchy about going back to its previous haunts and we could eventually push it into one of the circles. We reset the cordoned area around the new location and activated the devices again. This time I wasn't nearly fast enough to get away as the creature attacked without warning or sound. My armor took the brunt of the attack, but I still felt the ethereal claws rip into my skin below. I whirled away from the next strike as the creature howled in outrage. I blocked the pain from my mind as I cast Rejuvenate. I didn't have to dance with the creature long as Fiona appeared behind it, swinging the staff I had given her at the creature. It vanished into a shadow before her attack hit. I pulled out the last repellent device and turned it on, flooding the area we were standing in. There was no indication it had worked except for Fiona's grimace, so I had to assume the spirit fled to another section of the city. Sorry about that, I said, turning the device off and storing it again. It's fine, but how are we going to locate the spirit's new position this time? We will just have to work in a grid, clearing it section by section until we find it. We had to set up 3 more times before we caught the spirit in our trap again. Instead of leaving an open zone inside the area, we had closed it off so the device's fields overlapped slightly. With Fiona watching from above, she was able to determine that the creature fled to the south section of the city. This was good for us as that's where most of the active enchantment circles were. We changed our tactics slightly and slowly leapfrogged our active fields south. Essentially, hemming our prey into a corner. Distance didn't seem to matter as to how far the creature could teleport through shadows, but the direction did. We used this knowledge to our advantage, as we slowly pushed the increasingly angry spirit towards the enchantment circle. The chief had wanted us to do this incognito, but that was hardly an option anymore thanks to the creature's wailing and the frightened civilians that were out this early. Muget rode up to us and leaped off his horse before it even came to a stop. What are you doing? He demanded. You are causing a panic within the city. Well, excuse me for trying to save the city, but it's not like we can control the actions of this monster, I snapped back. The man ground his teeth. Can you at least hurry this along? I am going to have to answer a lot of angry people after the day is through, and I fear if night falls, all of your efforts will be in vain anyway. He was right. If we didn't finish by nightfall, we would have to start all over in the morning. Which, given the time constraints on the devices I build, wouldn't be good. We're working on it. Just try to evacuate anyone south of us and we will work as quickly as we can. Muget nodded stiffly and rode off, yelling at people in his path. As we got near one of the enchantment circles, I had Fiona circle to the far side and deploy her devices first. After she was ready, I activated them again. The creature screeched in frustration as it was flushed out again, but I saw it beeline straight for the circle. Just before it crossed the boundary, it tried to flash into another shadow but seemed to stop for some reason. Not wanting to give it time to ponder, I deployed my last device, forcing it across the barrier. There was a flash of rainbow light as it crossed, and the spirit seemed to go from irate rage to docile in a moment. It did try to flee through a shadow again, but the barrier flared subtly and it reappeared close by. This happened a few dozen more times before the spirit finally gave up and floated into a dark alley. Now that our work was done, it was up to the chief to locate the person bound to this creature. Seeing as it was no longer a threat to the city, he could take his time. Fiona dropped down beside me. Did we get it? Yup, I replied, with a smile. I want to personally thank the both of you for your assistance in this matter. I would have preferred it to have been less disruptive, but I can't deny your approach worked, the chief said, nodding his head. Munde Ying and an unknown silent one stood behind him, arms tucked into long sleeves. We would have preferred that option as well, but the creature proved to be difficult to catch, Fiona replied, playing to the nervous crowd that had gathered to watch the exchange. But now your city is safe again. Indeed, please, let us retire to my home and discuss your payment, the man said, gesturing for us to follow him. I wasn't all for hiding this from the citizens but had agreed to Fiona's plans, so kept it to myself. Mostly to get access to the mana heart supply, but partially because this wasn't my city or civilians to care about. I also wanted to wrap this up as soon as possible and get out of here. I suspected my spirit repellers may have awoken some other sleeping spirits. While I doubted the city would mind more spirits looking for hosts, I didn't want to get stuck here helping round up spirits for the next few months. Plus they had 2 of the lanterns, they could use those. It didn't take long to settle debts, and Chief Horror thanked us again for our confidentiality on the matter. Fiona collected the massive bag of low-quality mana hearts and stored them in her ring. I tried to talk Monday Ying into another duel, but she only smiled slightly in reply. It irritated me, but I figured forcing her into a duel wouldn't end well for me. With our business done and payment received, we headed toward the gate out of the city, Mugat leading us. Thank you for your help. I know you two didn't do it for completely altruistic reasons, but thanks anyway. You likely saved a lot of lives. I like you, Mugat, you don't mince words or hold back. I'll let you in on a secret, I left a few gifts in the form of magical lanterns. If you suddenly find yourself having other spirit issues, just have your town guards patrol the area with these lanterns and stop in one of the working enchantment circles. You don't even have to tell them why other than to keep the city safe. The man stopped and looked at me. We were far enough out of town that I felt fine about speaking about this. You suspect more spirits may stir? I shrugged. I doubt our efforts to capture the last one left them undisturbed. You should be prepared. If more lanterns are required in the future, you can speak with one of the merchants we send your way and they will get word to me. Mugat nodded. Very well, I will keep that in mind. Safe travels to both of you. Fiona nodded. Thank you for your kind words, Mugat. Relay our thanks to your people for their hospitality. With one final nod, Mugat turned around and walked back to the city gate. Fiona joined me at the exterior door to the fortress and we stepped inside. I felt much more emotionally stable after this trip and decided it was time to head back to St. June and see what was up. Seeing as we hadn't gotten a message, I figured they were doing well. Chapter 173, Trouble Brewing at Home. A white ring of swirling energy opened outside of St. June and 3 men stepped out. One of the men looked around in disdain with a cloth over his mouth to block out the dust that was kicked up by an errant gust of wind. "PUV, why did we arrive outside of the walls?" Lord Vic T asked in an accusatory tone. A shorter man scuttled over and knelt. "I am unsure, my lord. My spell should have brought us well inside the walls and near the government residence going by the information we collected." "Ugh, useless," Lord Vic T said, shoving the man aside and heading toward the gate in the distance. His guard and PUV the teleporter expert followed in his wake. He would have replaced PUV with someone more competent, but he was his sister's kid and keeping him around ensured that his sister would owe him a favor. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed and the large gate slammed shut at their approach with hard-looking men watching them from the top of the wall. Lord Vic T had confidence that if he wanted to he could destroy the wall and crush everyone within the town using his enchanted items, but now was not the time for violence. First, he would try diplomacy. It was always much easier just to buy cooperation than to subjugate cities. Lord Vic T stopped well short of spell distance and yelled, "My name is Lord Vic T, I wish to speak with your leader, please convey that a representative of the Enchanters Guild is here." None of the guards replied to him, but he did see one take out a small device, he recognized as a radio, and speak into it. Seeing as he got his point across, he walked back 50 feet and had PUV and his guard Ashlam set up a meeting table. Nothing simple would do for Lord Vic T, so everything from the carpet to the canopy was magical. The carpet reduced ambient noise to make it easier to speak, while the canopy blocked the harsh wind and weather, making it seem like you had stepped inside a thick stone-walled building. The table was a favorite of his, made out of a massive piece of ivory and inlaid with gold and silver. It preserved any food and drink left atop it at the correct temperature. The chairs were self-adjusting and allowed him to always sit just slightly higher than anyone else, focusing the attention on him. When everything was set down and prepared, he waited. And waited. After 2 hours he grew increasingly angry at being made to wait and was about to demand what was taking so long when the gate opened and 2 men walked out from the city. Lord Vic T had been studying earth culture and recognized the lawman-style hat one of the men wore. He assumed it was the leader of the guards or some such position. The other blonde-haired man was dressed in a flowery shirt and shorts, with sandals. Lord Victi bristled at the disrespect of being greeted by someone dressed so casually, but he forced those feeling aside and took on the air of a lord. "You sure you didn't want to change before meeting this man?" Kurt asked Martin as they reached the gate. "How long did you say he's been waiting?" "A few hours, nobody knew where you were, so it took some time to find you." "Sorry about that," Martin replied, "I'll notify my secretary the next time I decide to take a day off." "You don't have a secretary," Kurt replied flatly, ignoring the sarcasm from Martin's last reply. Maybe I should get one." "But no, we made the man wait long enough. Paul said he might show up eventually. I had hoped those two would have returned by now, but they must have found something interesting to pursue. In the meantime, we can see what this man wants. I imagine it isn't anything we would give him anyway. Then why bother meeting with him in the first place? Appearance, and it never hurts to find out what your enemy wants. Now come on, I can almost feel the man's anger from here." Kurt grunted as the gate opened to let them exit the city. The two of them approached the three men. The one seated was obviously this lord and one looked like a guard. It was easy to tell by the way the man's eyes took in everything. The third one he wasn't sure about. He seemed disinterested in the affairs as he scribbled in a notebook. Martin used identify on the three of them. He knew it was rude, but he wanted to know exactly what he was dealing with. Lord Victi High Mage / Enchanter 25/15. Ashlam Relegant Champion / Titan of Amerland 21/15. PUV Enchanter 15. Martin sighed internally. He had expected the man sitting down to be dual-classed and above 20, but not for the guard to be as well, but it made sense. Martin kicked himself mentally for ignoring his own leveling for so long. He had only just recently broken through to level 19 and Kurt had just hit level 17. A respectable level by any measure, but woefully short of facing off against either one of these two. He would have brought Ska along, but the Grimalkin was more likely to start a fight than sit by quietly and observe. No, he would have to rely on his charm to get through this encounter. Martin walked up to the table and bowed. "Greetings, my name is Martin and I am the mayor of St. June. To what do I owe the pleasure of a guild visit and from someone who must have more important things to do, such as yourself?" he asked. When Martin straightened, he saw the wisp of a frown disappearing on the sitting man's face. Martin wanted to smile, knowing that Paul had called it correctly. It seemed he had been right in deducing the man didn't possess powers to read minds, but some item that granted him a similar ability. With the ring Martin was wearing, it made any attempt to do so a fruitless effort. The ring strengthened your mental resistance but also put out a disruptive field. It was similar to the items Paul had made to fight the jackals but was much stronger. Kurt also wore one, but only for this meeting. Lord Victi didn't seem too flustered about the issue as he gestured to the seat across from him. "Please have a seat, I believe we have a few things to discuss and an offer I would like to make." Martin nodded and took the offered seat, not that he expected to accept the offer, but he would listen anyway. "I see you are familiar with the guild," Lord Victi replied. "I must admit I am surprised at such a remote town hearing about us." Martin smiled. "I wasn't always mayor. I traveled quite a bit before settling down here, hard not to hear about the Enchanters Guild from one place or another. But now I must admit my surprise as to what you could want in our small city. As far as I know, your organization is more concerned with cities that contain bazaars. That is true in most cases, but sometimes we find our interest drawn farther afield. One of my main reasons for coming here was to meet with a man named Paul Fuller. Do you know him by any chance?" "I am aware of the man, but I am surprised, Lord Victi, that you do not remember meeting him yourself." The man tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "You met with him earlier this year," Martin stated. "He came to Biloxi looking for a fugitive." Biloxi, fugitive. Oh, that Michael fellow that we captured. I recall now. So you're saying that man with the feline kin was this Paul? And how did you know about this exchange?" Lord Victi asked in curiosity. "My hometown was Arman. It was the town wiped out by Michael and his group prior to them attacking Biloxi. I thought your accent was familiar. A terrible shame that whole mess. Was that situation finally resolved?" Martin just nodded. Good, good. It's never a good idea to let problems fester." "I couldn't agree more," Martin replied. "So, why are you here to meet Paul?" "Straight to business then," Lord Victi smiled. "I can respect that. I would like to meet this Paul, and perhaps offer to purchase your city." Martin leaned back in his chair like he was thinking about the offer. Paul and Fiona had been gone for over a month and he didn't know when to expect them back. So he wouldn't have to lie about that at least. As for the city, the only reason he could think of for the man's interest in the city was Paul's runic enchantments. And he wasn't about to let the man get his hands on those. Mr. Fuller hasn't been around for some time. I don't know when or if he will return. As for the city, I am not interested in your offer, I'm sorry. Martin made to get up but Lord Victi held up his hand. I can guarantee that my offer would make everyone within the city beyond rich and they could spend the rest of their lives living in luxury. I'm sure your offer is more than generous, but as I said, I am not interested, Martin added as he finished standing. I'm sorry you have come all this way for nothing. Martin turned and heard steel being drawn. My lord did not excuse you, the guard said. Martin turned to face the guard. Is there a problem here? The man made to take a step forward but Lord Victi held up a finger and the man stopped. No, my guard is overzealous at times. Perhaps he was just taken aback at having my generous offer refused. Over a dozen targeting lasers passed over the table, aimed at the three individuals. Martin held his hand up to stop the guards at the wall from firing. Martin stepped back toward the table. Do not mistake our hospitality for weakness. We have heard your offer and refused it. Perhaps you should learn to take no for an answer. Now control your man before I have my guards put him down. Lord Victi smiled and gave a wave and his guard stepped back and sheathed his sword. Apologies for the misunderstanding, I will make sure to reprimand him when we return home. Martin gave the man a cold glare. Lord Victi's eyes flashed toward the top of the wall and spotted at least a dozen weapons that resembled monocannons, all aimed his way. He didn't know how these peasants had gotten a hold of the weapons but he knew when to step back and reassess the situation. Very well, Mayor Martin. I see we aren't going to reach an agreement here. My men and I will be on our way, sorry for disturbing you and your city, he replied, controlling his raging emotions as he bowed slightly. As long as we have an understanding, the mayor replied, before turning and heading back toward their city. When they were out of sight, Lord Victi spoke in a low growl, assemble our forces. Take the city at all costs. I want that man captured and find out where Paul Fuller ran off to. At once my lord, Ashlam said with a bow. PUV get a gate open and get us out of here. The younger man nodded frantically as he prepared a gate enchantment while Ashlam quickly stored the items away. Lord Victi ground his teeth, these damn humans were stubborn but they would learn their place eventually, just like the ones in Biloxi when he took over. A few examples would have to be made but people would step into line quickly. That went well, Kurt said with sarcasm. It went as well as could be expected. That man sees us as nothing but a resource to be bought and sold at his whim. We would never be equals to a man like that and playing to his ego any longer would be a fruitless endeavor. I learned what I needed to and that is all that matters. Oh, and what is that if you don't mind my asking? They know Paul is headquartered here, which means someone leaked that information. And we know what he is after and that's the enchantments that Paul has created. So while he may attack us, they probably won't want to damage the town too much in order to acquire anything he's made, Martin replied. We don't have an army. How are we supposed to fight off one of the strongest organizations in the multiverse? Kurt demanded. We won't have to. We only have to keep them out of the city until Paul returns. I'm sure by then he will have come up with or will come up with a way to fight them off. I don't like this, Kurt replied. You don't have to. I trust the defenses we have in place and so should you. The man grumbled but seemed to accept the truth of the matter. Martin wasn't so sure he did and would keep an eye on the man. Chapter 174, Infiltration. As soon as the portal vanished and Lord Victi was secure, Ashlam went to gather his forces. The Lord wanted an all-out assault but Ashlam knew there were better ways to secure a city than attacking it outright and he knew the Lord deferred to him on matters of battle. With that in mind, he headed toward the barracks and his infiltration team. He would still ready the army but that could take time his infiltration unit would need to undermine the enemy city and make it an easier target. Gol, Nalam, where are the others? He demanded after entering the room. The two jumped to attention and Gol answered, they are on rotation duty, sir. Gather them up, I have a mission for the four of you. Gol hurried off to collect the others while Ashlam and Nalam waited. What sort of mission are we talking about? The female Narmani purred. Ashlam ignored the question of the beautiful Narmani woman. If it wasn't for the fact that he was her superior and that feline kin were almost always extremely aggressive lovers, he might have considered a romp with the woman, but he put those thoughts aside as the other three returned. Good, sit down and I will go over the mission. After they were seated, he laid out the objective. The Lord has issued a decree that he wants the city at all costs. I want the four of you to infiltrate the city, disrupt operations, and kill anyone that might get in our way. Leave the mayor. The Lord wishes to personally teach that man some manners. If you encounter a man named Paul Fuller, secure him alive. Nobody else is of any value. What sort of opposition are we looking at? Kruka asked. Ashlam looked at the Golfin and barely repressed a grimace at the gelatinous being's appearance. Despite the difficulty of harming a Golfin, Kruka was the most cautious of the group. We don't know. The mayor is level 19 and who we suspect to be the guard captain is only level 17. That isn't much to go on, Kruka grumbled. No, it isn't. You will need to do your surveillance while remaining inconspicuous. How is it that this is all the information we are being provided? Balin asked. Weren't you in their city? Balin was another of this team he didn't much care for. While he looked human, he was an undead species called a Bakok. Ashlam had no problem contracting undead to fight for their armies, he just didn't like personally working with them. No, that idiot PUV screwed up the destination and we appeared outside of the town. We were noticed as soon as we arrived, so we couldn't attempt a second jump inside. I don't like going in blind, Balin grumbled. You will have to figure it out, or I could tell Lord Victi that you refused his orders, Ashlam replied pointedly. I never said I wouldn't go, I'm just voicing my disapproval. Well, keep that shit to yourself. You were paid well to be here and all you have done is patrol a small human city. It's time you earned your exorbitant pay. Ah, this should be fun, Nelam crooned, her tail swishing back and forth in excitement. Keep it together, Nelam, this is a stealth excursion, Gol chided. Nelam hissed in disappointment, but she settled down. Ashlam had to give the half-elf leader credit, he knew his people and how to keep them in line. You have 12 hours to prepare, then PUV will teleport you inside the forest near their city. They have significant fortifications, but it's a port town with an open waterfront. That will probably be the easiest way in, but use your judgment. Ashlam enjoyed the uncomfortable twitching that Nelam did at the mention of water. He had purposefully done it just for the show it elicited and once again contemplated enjoying a night with the flexible Narmani. Thank you for the information, Commander Ashlam. We will survey the situation and go from there, Gol replied coldly. Ashlam smirked at the hostile tone in the man's voice, knowing full well what brought it on. It was no secret that Nelam was his woman. But if Ashlam wanted her, she would be his for the simple reason that Narmani, along with most feline kin, respected strength above all else. And while Gol was strong at level 19, he couldn't hold a candle to Ashlam's current levels. Don't screw this up, the Lord is watching. The army will set out 2 weeks after you do. See that our conquest of the city goes smoothly and you will be rewarded handsomely. Ashlam didn't have to mention what would happen if they failed. Failing the guild only had one outcome and the four of them already knew that. Gol kicked a boulder, sending a spider web of cracks along the surface after the four of them had been deposited in the forest near their objective. Who the fuck does Ashlam think he is? Gol growled. Calm yourself, let that idiot posture. Nelam loves you, Balin said, laying a restraining hand on his shoulder. Bah, what do you know? If he challenged me, she would go to the victor without batting an eye, and there is no way I would win. You don't know that, but if you're worried, we could make it look like he had an unfortunate accident, Balin offered. No, they would look into it and with Lord Victi's resources, they would find out. If it comes to that, I will figure something out. Let's just wait for Nelam to finish scouting and we can come up with a plan for getting inside this city undetected. Gol knew why his team was chosen for this mission. They weren't the strongest, but they all had abilities that helped them hide from detection and move about unnoticed. Mainly they were used for assassination-type missions, but infiltration and subversion were also in their wheelhouse. Both Balin and Nelam had the skills to charm others. Balin's were more targeted while Nelam's were more unintentional. Although, with effort, she could control them. Though she chose not to for the most part, which frustrated Gol to no end. Nelam appeared an hour later. Did you miss me, lover boy? She said with a wink, while seductively rubbing past him. Her tail curled around his body to tickle his senses. Gol suppressed the urge to force her to the ground and have her now. Thankfully he was used to her playfulness after being together for so long. She always got this way when a mission started. The rush of possible combat made her arousal skyrocket. Always, what do you have to report? He asked flatly. She pouted after failing to get him to rise to the occasion. Not much, there is a walled-off farming section to our south. Not much there but fields and a few workers. No food we can destroy? Kruka asked. No, the fields are new. We could burn it on our way out but I suspect Ashlam and the army will do that for us. The city sits on a tall plateau and has only one road leading up to it. That is our first obstacle. The second is the earthen wall and guard towers dotting it. I saw at least a dozen guards patrolling the tops and they were very alert. Not ideal, Gol cut in, what about the north or south? Nelam hissed at being interrupted but she continued. The plateau eventually fades off far past the city to the north but there is no cover and that entire area is overrun with rock elementals. As for the south, she said, hissing again, that's all water, seems like a large cove of salt water but I didn't get too close. The plateau ends in cliffs but the wall extends down the cliff and about 100 yards into the water. Damn it, it seems like these people prepared to prevent an invasion. There is no other reason to have that wall extend down the cliff face and into the water otherwise. Any ideas how to get inside? Gol asked. Why not just phase through the wall? Balin asked. That's one option, but I assume if they went to all this trouble, they have ways to stop that. I think scaling the wall or going around it, oceanside is our best bet. Why not try all three ways? Kruka suggested. Nelam nodded furiously at this, she hated water and would avoid the possibility of getting wet if she could. Fine. Balin, you try to go through the wall since you can hide better if it fails. Nelam and Kruka, you both scale the walls, I will go oceanside. We need a spot to meet up once we are inside though, any suggestions? Nelam nodded, there are some piers near the waterfront. I could see them from the plateau. I didn't see much movement down there so they should be safe to meet it. Works for me. Stay safe and don't engage if you are discovered. At worst, they may toss us back out or lock us up for a bit. The others nodded as they began moving off to find the best location to enter the city. Gol wouldn't normally split his team up but they were used to working alone on many missions. Still, he didn't like having so little information. It wasn't usual for the guild to be so unprepared when assaulting a target. But he pushed his misgivings to the side and thought about the money he would make for this job. Maybe he would even push himself to level 20 on this contract, then he could quickly level up his new class and deal with that prick Ashlam. Kruka oozed through the rocky landscape as he approached the city wall. His body was stretched out for dozens of feet, not a common shape that he took but his body was flexible and could squeeze through many small cracks. It had served him well being that it was an innate ability of his race instead of a skill. This made it undetectable. His eyes watched the city wall and his teammates as they made their own way to the wall. Nelam's ability to hide in shadow was peculiar. She had explained it to him once as not actually hiding in the shadow, but wrapping it around her. He didn't see the difference as they did effectively the same thing but she had assured him it was different. Balin just used simple invisibility to mask his approach. Like Kruka's own racial ability, Balin's invisibility was tied to his race as a sapient undead. Kruka had only met a few intelligent undead in his lifetime. Most at the end of his weapons, but he liked the stoic Balin. He was most of the way up the wall unable to find a crack to squeeze through when a siren went off. Thinking himself discovered, he oozed up under a small lip of rock near the top of the wall and froze. Soon bright spotlights started tracking over the ground near where Balin had been. Kruka immediately spotted what had given the man away. Clear footprints in the dusty soil led toward the wall. Kruka knew Balin preferred to work in cities, the man must have forgotten the difficulties of remaining hidden outdoors, and that lapse in judgment would cost all of them. Spells began to rain down around that area and Balin abandoned stealth to sprint away from the wall. He didn't get far as 3 blinding beams of white light speared out from overhead. 2 of the beams missed Balin and the ground around their impacts erupted. The third beam struck the undead man in the torso and half his body was vaporized in an instant as the beam continued through and hit the ground, sending the already dead man flying through the air. Kruka wanted to curse at the man's rookie mistake but he didn't dare move or utter a sound. He had lost track of Nelam during the confusion but if she were smart she would bide her time. Hours passed as Kruka remained hidden under the lip of the wall. He watched soldiers pour out of the city to check the body as well as look for more infiltrators. They didn't find him or Nelam so she must have been hidden quite well as the soldiers scoured the area quite thoroughly. GOL needed to be made aware of this turn of events, it would make their job much harder. Chapter 175, Overdue Return. Any idea who or what it was? Martin asked as he stared at the mangled corpse on the coroner's table. Martin was thankful the city had power again, otherwise, the smell would have been unbearable. Kurt shrugged, "Your guess is as good as mine," the man answered noncommittally. Martin suppressed the urge to throttle the man. He had become more a detriment than an asset since Martin took office. "Who got the kill message?" Martin asked, keeping the frustration from coloring his question. "One of the guards." "Why?" "Go find out who it was and see what the message told them." "Fine, but I don't see the point." "It's pretty obvious who sent them," Kurt grumbled. "Just do your job, Sheriff." With one last irritated huff, Kurt left the room. After he was gone, Martin turned toward the coroner. Was he always like this? Before answering, the coroner made sure to check that Kurt was long gone. "Far as I can tell, the man has always been an ass. I never really worked with him, but others I knew said he only got his position through brown nosing. The funny thing is the man is decent at his job, when he wants to do it. Plus he was one of the few officers to stick around after the change." "Fair enough," Martin replied. "What can you tell me about the body?" "It's dead," the man stated. "I can see that," Martin said in exasperation as he gestured at the corpse. "Sorry, I meant it was dead prior to being dead." "Undead, like a zombie?" The man shrugged, "No clue if it was a zombie or not, it's not like I have a medical degree in alien species and undead anatomy." "Fine, anything on it?" Martin asked as he ran his hand through his hair in frustration. The man motioned him over toward another stainless steel table where the dead, or re-dead, man's clothing, and items sat. "The clothing doesn't appear to be anything special. Or it isn't anymore. I think the damage may have destroyed any enchantment it had, but that isn't my area of expertise," the man began to ramble. "And the other items," Martin cut in, he didn't have all day to listen to a report. "The 2 daggers are enchanted, I believe." Marin picked up one of the sheathed weapons and used examination on it, his version of Identify. "Dirk of Disembowelment. Quality, Supreme. Damage, 20 to 30 stabbing x 5 critical damage. If this weapon is used to cause a critical strike or a strike at a vulnerable area, it causes a bleeding wound that cannot be healed by anything short of holy power." Martin gently set the dangerous blade back on the table and made a mental note to pick up some holy healing potions. The next dagger was just as brutal. "Dagger from the Dark. Quality, Excellent. Damage, 15 to 30 slashing x 4 critical damage. All attacks made with this weapon on an unsuspecting opponent do critical damage." From what Martin knew of stealth classes or assassin classes, thanks to Paul and Ska's perusal during their second class, said that most had an ability to double or triple the damage they caused from stealth. That meant one attack could probably kill anyone with an endurance under 15 in one blow. With just these 2 weapons, Martin knew what sort of people he was dealing with. These weren't spies, these were assassins sent to cause harm. The problem was Martin had no clue how many more had made it inside the city. Martin wasn't naive enough to believe they had only sent one man. There was a storage ring as well, but it only contained a few poisons and general use items. Martin stored the daggers in the ring and stuffed it in his pocket. He wished Ska was back from his hunt. He suspected he would need the Grimalkin's help to locate the rest of the assassins. Other than Fiona, he didn't know anyone within the city with the skills to ferret out people adept at hiding. That fucking idiot! Gol cursed. Kruka had just met up with him, relaying the story of Balin's death. "What about Naylam?" "I haven't seen her since the incident. But there hasn't been any ruckus, so she must be staying out of sight." It took 2 more hours before the woman finally appeared. "Miss me?" she purred in agitated excitement. "What took you so long?" he asked, ignoring her mood. She sniffed. "I was doing recon of the city." "That could have waited," Gol huffed. "Perhaps, but I figured Kruka would tell you what transpired, and this way I have a better understanding of the city's response and preparedness." Gol grunted. "So what did you learn?" "They don't have as many guards as we feared. And there are a lot of civilians. It should be quite easy to cause fear and sow distrust." "Did you get any eyes on the leaders?" Kruka asked. "Perhaps," she said with a suggestive wink at the Golfin. She laughed when the gelatinous man reflexively spread itself away from her. "Enough!" Gol hissed, "Play your games later, we have work to do now." "Fine," she pouted, "I spotted the sheriff and I believe the mayor." You believe? Gol questioned. She shrugged. The man didn't look like any town leader I have ever known, but the description Ashlam gave matches. Human with blonde hair and handsome, she said that last part with a purr of delight that made Gol want to snap the mayor's neck. Anything other than his looks? Kruka asked, changing the subject. I wasn't able to get close enough to identify either of the men. The mayor seemed alert and focused though, so he won't be a pushover. The sheriff on the other hand seemed more like the normal town guards we've run into. You think we can turn him? Gol asked. Maybe, but it won't be me, she said with a frown. Into men? Gol asked. No, he definitely enjoys the female figure, but it's clear to see his distrust of Outworlders in the way he eyed them all with distrust. The man was either afraid of them or actively hated them for some reason. Fine, I should be able to pass myself off as a human and gauge his reaction. You should go now, the man is in a bar drinking his worries away. After getting the directions and assigning tasks, the three split up again to start weakening the town's resolve. It was 3 days after the excitement outside the gate when Scar returned from his hunt. He was happy with the results. He had managed to get to level 12 in his warden class. As always, he put points in agility, bringing it to 27, but he also maxed out his perception and endurance to 20 and decided to finally add a point in intelligence, bringing it to 12. He didn't feel any smarter, but perhaps he understood concepts just a bit better than before. Now he only needed to figure out how to unlock the second tier of perception and endurance before level 15. As soon as he crossed the gates into the city, he could smell an underlying stink of fear and uncertainty. He didn't like it and went in search of Martin to find out what was causing it. Ska, you're back! Martin exclaimed happily. Ska rumbled in agreement. I am, but what is going on in town? I can sense the unease. We have some enemies causing trouble around town. Ska could sense the man's frustration. Why not get rid of them? Martin smiled wanly. If it were only that easy, it would have already been done. No, these people are skilled at hiding and espionage. We haven't been able to locate them or even tell how many of them are in the town since they arrived 3 days ago. Why didn't you send me a message? Ska growled. I tried, it seems they planted some device that prevents that enchantment from functioning. I would have sent a runner to get you, but we didn't know where you were hunting. Ska hissed in displeasure. He hated subterfuge. What do you need of me? We managed to kill one of the men when they were trying to infiltrate the town. Can you see if you can find their trail, or at least tell us how many we are dealing with? Of course, just show me where to start, Ska added in a predatory growl that started deep in his chest. Most people would realize it for what it was and flee, but Martin just nodded. I will call one of the wall guards to show you where to begin. Stay safe, there haven't been any deaths that we know of, but I suspect that might change shortly. Ska found himself outside the walls and was scenting the area the guard had told him of. The smell of foul undead still hung heavy in the air, which didn't surprise Ska. Martin had told him of the creature they had killed. The visible tracks were easy to follow, but the scent was weak after 3 days. Ska still followed it down the plateau and into a small clearing in the woods. The smells became even harder to separate here, but thankfully, whoever was here, had lingered for some time. He found trace footprints of at least 2 more individuals and some sort of trail he couldn't discern the origin of. He leaned down and sniffed at the prints, inhaling deeply for a couple of minutes until he was satisfied. He growled softly and picked one of the trails to follow. He had tried to use hunter's scent, but the trail was either too old or something was blocking the skill. But that didn't stop him from using his own senses to trace it. The trail ended near the lapping waves of the ocean and Ska turned toward the city wall in the distance. While he was loath to brave the waters, it would be one of the easiest ways into the city. Ska would mention it to Martin. The next trail was more difficult to follow, not because the scent was weaker but because it was odd. He knew it was a beastkin of some sort from the few stray hairs he found along the path, but it was like the trail would start and stop behind random boulders. He lost it among the scattered boulders outside the city. That was fine, he returned to try and track the last trail. This trail was odd as well. At first Ska thought it was made by some sort of snake-like creature, but there were signs of slime amongst the trail. It was also the most well-hidden trail and Ska could see where attempts were made to hide portions of it. But that only proved to Ska that whatever it was intelligent. This trail he managed to follow all the way to the city wall. Any chance of tracking it into the city was gone as the trail had been destroyed by too many people crossing over it. Ska hissed his annoyance, scaring off 2 patrolling guards. The trails were cold, but he had their scent now. If he came across it inside the city, his hunter's scent would be able to lock onto it. Gol knew everything had been going too smoothly. First, the sheriff had been easy to turn against the town and the mayor in particular. A simple guarantee that the town and its citizens would remain safe, and the man was happy to spill his guts. A little liquor and a simple potion sped that matter along. Gol had almost felt disgusted at how easy the man had been to turn. Gol enjoyed a challenge, and that was hardly even an hour's worth of work. It didn't matter though, the man would die before Lord Vic T took over. It never paid to have weak-willed individuals or traitors within key positions. That wasn't what had Gol agitated though. No, it was the hunter he had spotted heading into town. And not just any hunter, but a high-level feline beastkin hunter. Gol had gotten a good look at the man and could tell by his attributes that he was more akin to the large predatory cats than Nalam's own heritage. His secondary worry was Nalam seeing the beastkin and falling head over heels for him, or worse, trying to seduce him. He needed to head back to their meeting spot to warn the others. Chapter 176, The Hunt is On. Ska walked back through the city gate. He was going to relay what he found to Martin when a familiar scent crossed his nose. He paused, inhaling deeply. Unlike the old scent trails located outside, this one was new, and he knew it was enough to trigger his skill. He rumbled in delight as he began to stalk his first target. The trail meandered and at times went below and above the city streets in an effort to throw him off. But the efforts were in vain. So lost in his hunt, Ska didn't notice the trap laid across his path. He knew his mistake the moment he made it as the wire went taut. He threw himself clear of the blast, only catching the edge of it and getting his hair singed off for his trouble. Other guards rushed over to see what had happened. Ska roared in anger, some at his foolishness but most directed at the perpetrator of this trap. Ska could see a few people lying motionless near where the bomb had detonated, and it made him furious. "Gather a team and follow me," he ground out to the other guards. They nodded and rushed off to get more soldiers. Gol was nearly at the meeting spot when he heard the distant boom. His head flicked toward that direction and he cursed. He had hoped for more time, it had to be that hunter. Dropping all pretense, he rushed down the dark alley and toward the warehouses near the docks. He would have to rely on his stealth skills to remain unnoticed, but time was now of the essence. It took only 5 more minutes to get to the meeting location, but he was out of breath and the other two were not there yet. He swore softly, realizing they weren't due to show up for another 30 minutes. He hoped the explosion would have made them realize something had changed and hurry there. Gol waited another 5 minutes, getting more paranoid by the second. He was just about to leave when Kruka slipped in. "Boss, what's going on? Was that explosion you're doing?" "Yeah, I picked up a tail. We need to wait for Nalam and get the hell out of this town. I can explain the rest when she arrives." Kruka looked confused but nodded. It was 3 more minutes before Nalam sauntered in, looking unconcerned. "What is all the ruckus about? The guards are in a tizzy." "We need to go, I was surveying the gate when a hunter entered town." "So," Nalam purred, "we have dealt with hunters before, why is this one any different?" she asked, wrapping her arm around Gol and squeezing herself against him. Gol shoved her off more forcefully than he had intended and she hissed angrily at him. "This isn't just any hunter, it is a level 20 beastkin hunter." That seemed to make her pause. What she said next was not what Gol wanted to hear. "Then if it has our scent, it is likely already too late. The 3 of us can take one hunter. If we leave without completing our contract, the guild will only send professionals after us. Let's lure the rube here and be done with it." Ska was angry, but he took the advice Martin had given him long ago and pushed it down so he could focus. It was hard, but that point he had stuck into intelligence seemed to be paying off and he was able to suppress the desire to race after his target and tear it limb from limb. 6 other guards followed him as he located the trail again, this time taking precautions in case of more traps. It was good he did, as there were 2 more bombs placed along the route. One was large enough to kill everyone within 100 feet. The traps were disarmed and the explosives secured before they moved on. The trail ended inside a warehouse. Ska had circled it 3 times and scented the trail of all 3 of the individuals he had found entering the city. But it felt off. "Keep the rest of the men outside and cover the exits. Stay in teams of 2. The guards nodded as they took up position. Ska had already sent another guard to notify Martin about the bomb. Ska gave a low growl as he quietly made his way into the large warehouse. The scent of the 3 was everywhere, making it difficult to determine where they might be. A growl of frustration slipped out. Not because he couldn't locate the intruders, but because he had to play these games. Paul and then the marshal had helped him overcome that weakness through training. Ska knew they were in here, so he tuned out the scents and scanned for anything out of the ordinary. His eyes passed over the shadow of an overhead beam, but something was off about the shadow. Ska extended his claws and leaped into the air, slicing them through the beam overhead. There was a squeal of pain as globs of slime splattered on the ground. That seemed to be the trigger as the other two attackers appeared from nowhere. Ska ducked a thrown dagger and snatched the next out of the air as he rushed a man wearing black leather armor. He was almost upon the man before he was tackled from the side. He rolled with the hit and kicked his attacker off, eliciting a feline yowl. He didn't spare time to think about it being another feline ekin as he jumped off the ground, avoiding two more daggers. "Hold him down, he's too fast," the unknown man yelled. Ska spotted the first thing he attacked as it oozed from the beam and started reaching for him. It seemed in pain though and was slow to advance. Ska took advantage of this hesitation and rushed the creature. That was the right move as the creature flinched back. It tried to duck out of the way, but despite its bonelessness, Ska was quicker. Ska activated 3 abilities: Debilitating Strike, Double Strike, and Smash. The thing let out a warbling howl of pain as chunks of it were sent splattering across the warehouse, but Ska didn't relent as he grabbed a hold of the thing with one hand and activated Inescapable. Ska kept dodging the other two attackers as he laid into the slime man. The man was lashing him with spiky tentacles, but Ska endured the pain as he activated Shield of Defiance, his new skill that allowed him to shunt damage equal to his stamina away from his health. The creature was slowing and the other two had realized their attacks were ineffectual, so they split up and ran. It took a few more minutes, but Ska eventually finished off the Golfin as the system message called it. Ska stood victorious over his kill, covered in his blood and the Golfin's slime. His body was uninjured thanks to the enchantment on his claws and his shield. When Ska got outside, he found one guard had been killed and the other wounded by the escaping man. The woman had vanished and nobody had seen her leave. Not that it mattered, Ska would find her. Ska poured a healing potion down the surviving guard's throat and rushed off after the man. Martin had a bad feeling as he got Ska's message, so he headed toward the control tower for the shields. When he got there, he found the guards that were supposed to be stationed outside, dead and the door open. Without waiting for backup, Martin dropped his dice and summoned his creature. Wisps of fog started to collect until they formed a wraith-like being. Martin hadn't conjured this type of creature before, so he wasn't sure of its abilities, but he would find out. He wasn't foolish enough to go inside the tower by himself, and there was only one exit, so he erected his shield and waited outside the door. It didn't take long for a man he recognized to exit the tower, dragging a bloody sword. "So, Kurt, you chose betrayal." The man looked confused but still pointed his sword at Martin, "And no, this wasn't me," he said, looking around in panic. "You killed them. This is your fault," he yelled. "God, what did they do to you?" "No, no, 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 no," Kurt yelled, slapping his head. "You did this, you betrayed the city," he screamed. Martin shook his head sadly. "If it wasn't for me and my friends, this town would have died along with everyone else, maybe not right away but soon enough that it wouldn't have mattered. You had no plans in place to keep beasts out. Nothing to deal with sea monsters. And not even any idea how to deal with your dwindling food supply. All things we fixed, yet you say it's our fault that some pompous prick wants what he isn't entitled to? You're lucky Paul isn't here. He wouldn't have tried talking you out of this, he would have simply killed you and been done with it. But I am a more reasonable man. I can see you aren't yourself. Lay down your sword and come peacefully, or I will have no choice but to kill you." Kurt spat. "You think you and your friends are hot shit, just because you are higher level? Well, you're not. You may have fooled the city into thinking you have their best interests at heart, but I can see the truth. You just want out access to resources and to use this town as your personal playground. I'm done wasting time with you, Kurt. Attack me or surrender." Martin raised his hand as his shield flared. He looked over at a second man dressed in black. The man seemed surprised that his dagger failed to penetrate the shield and he tried to run for it, but the wraith grabbed him. Martin shuddered as the man and wraith screamed. Martin followed up the attack with a void bolt at the man's leg, tearing it off. "Don't kill him, I have questions, just make sure he doesn't escape," Martin said coldly. Both wraith and man stopped screaming as the man fell to the ground like a marionette with his strings cut. Martin didn't miss the fact that the unknown man's bleeding stopped shortly after. With that nuisance taken care of, he turned back to the fuming Kurt. Kurt screamed some gibberish about attacking his friends and rushed at him, but the fight was pretty one-sided. By the time Martin had finished, the only thing that remained of Kurt was a black pile of goo. Martin may have vented his frustrations a bit more than wise. He would have preferred taking the man alive, but his skills weren't really designed for disabling people, and the Wraith was busy watching the other man. Plus Kurt had been irritating him for longer than these spies had been around. Martin had heard rumors of the man's feelings about how the town was being run. Until now he had chosen to ignore them for the sake of keeping the peace. But even if coercion was used, these acts were unacceptable. Martin shook his head and walked inside to see the damage. Most of the controls were broken and all the technicians inside had been killed by either Kurt or that other man. Martin sighed and headed back outside. He found Ska and a few other guards standing around the Wraith and the downed man. "Did you get the others?" Martin asked. "I killed one but two escaped," he pointed to the one on the ground. "I'll go after the last one. Did you want her alive? If you can take her alive without too much issue, do so, if not, make sure she doesn't get away. They sabotaged our control room and killed Kurt." There were murmurs of concern from the guards. "Don't worry, we have contingencies in place. 4 of you take that man to a holding cell and make sure he is ready to talk." The guards hauled the struggling man to his feet and slapped magic suppression cuffs on him. It took a few blows to the man's head before he was compliant enough to be moved. Ska had already raced off after the last saboteur. "The rest of you clean up these bodies and keep the public away." "What about Kurt?" one of them asked. Martin pointed to the blackened form on the ground. The guards looked angrily at the pile but nodded as they got to work. Martin sighed internally at the lie, but better the man dies a hero than being exposed as a traitor. Ska chased the beastkin woman's trail. She was stealthy but her skills slowed her down and Ska caught up quickly. The building was an empty residence and Ska pushed the door open quietly. "You might as well show yourself, I know you're here," he growled. "So assertive," a voice purred back. "Perhaps you and I could come to another understanding," she chuckled. "Spare me your offers and honey-coated words. Come out and you may yet live." "Oh, where would the fun in that be?" she said. Ska heard a slight creak and jumped out of the path of 2 daggers. He heard a giggle and saw a flash of movement from the 2nd floor. He growled in annoyance and jumped to the balcony, avoiding another dagger. "You won't win," he stated. "Perhaps," a voice from behind him hissed before a weight landed on his back. He felt her claws dig into his skin, but dropped to the ground on top of her, eliciting a grunt and making her release her hold. He twisted away before she could grab him again and stomped down on her chest. She howled in pain but tore into his leg with her claws. He ignored the pain as he slapped her hard across the face. "Enough, you lost," she hissed in defiance, so Ska punched her in the head until she lost consciousness. After she went limp, he stepped back. He admired the fierce woman, and if she hadn't been an enemy of the city she may have made a good mate. She wasn't Grimalkin but she was at least feline beastkin. He securely restrained the woman and tossed her over his shoulder to take her Martin for questioning. Chapter 177, City Under Siege. "Hey, Fiona, I think we may have a problem," I said as I looked at the remote viewing orb. It wasn't quite clear as we were still a ways off from the coast and the orb wasn't designed to see that far away. What I had noticed was a haze of dark smoke. I may have missed it if I hadn't been watching the orb out of boredom and saw a slightly thicker clump of smoke. "What is it?" Fiona asked as she hurried into the room. "Smoke. I'm going to cloak the fortress. Can you fly ahead and get an idea of what we are flying into?" She looked worried about the possibility that the city and most likely Martin may be in trouble and nodded. It didn't take her long to fly off and return, being much faster than the fortress. "City is mostly intact. It seems a few attacks made it through before the shield got raised. The smoke is coming from the walled-in farming area to the east. There seems to be an army camped out near the remains. They also appear to have mobile monocannons and are occasionally firing onto the plateau and the city shield. Fuck, if they have monocannons I can only think of one group it could possibly be." "You think it's the guild?" Fiona asked. "I hope so, otherwise we have another group that can raise an army and has the resources to get their hands on the cannons." "Well, it's not all bad news, I saw some return fire from the city. And it looked like scattered bodies on the plateau," she added. "All right, I'll get closer to the city but with the shield up I can't set the fortress down inside." "Really, I would have thought you would have built a back door for just that reason." "For weapons maybe but not the shield. I didn't want the fortress or something else accidentally winding up in enemy hands that could bypass the protection. Besides, if the shield is up, Martin should be fine, since he was the only one that could authorize it to be activated." "Why not use the fortress to assault the army?" she asked instead. A few reasons. I haven't fully repaired the weapons and we don't have enough people to operate them effectively, not that I think it would do us any good. If the army is still there even under the assault of the city, I doubt adding a few cannons will discourage them. You might be able to get through the shield, but that's only a guess on my part, and you aren't going to like how you are going to have to accomplish it. I was right, she didn't like my suggestion, but she left anyway. She was getting anxious about not knowing if Martin was okay or not. I knew he probably was, but this gave her a direction to focus her energy in. The shield effectively covered the entirety of the city with a massive translucent dome that rippled in rainbow light as the beams of energy struck it. It covered the harbor as well, but no shield could pass through solid objects, so it stopped at the ground. While nothing could pass into the shield, it acted much like Martin's spell and allowed attacks to pass out from inside. This was the way all the shields I had come into contact with behaved. This was why I built the teleportation scrambler that worked with the shield array. Otherwise, anyone could just bypass the shield and teleport inside. That left only the ground as the weak point, and that was magically hardened with hidden runic arrays across the city. It would take someone of my intelligence level or higher to break through those wards, making me relatively certain they would hold up to most attacks. What Fiona could do though, was pass through solid objects. She didn't like to do that because she said it felt weird and she would need to pass through meters of stone to get through the wards, but it was the only way to contact Martin and get him to lower the shield so I could land. At least I hoped she could get past the arrays. I wasn't entirely sure it would work for her. If not, we would have to rethink our plan or become visible, but that would endanger the town. This plan with Fiona was safer, and we could disable the shield at night when most of the attacks slowed down. It took 2 full days of waiting before Fiona returned. I made it through. It wasn't easy. Martin said he will lower the shield for 5 minutes at midnight tonight. I nodded. I had been watching the siege, and even during the night the attacks only slowed, they never truly stopped. It was easy to see why, as my teleportation detectors were going nuts. It seems they were cycling out troops to rest and bringing in fresh ones to continue charging the weapons. It wasn't a sustainable position for St. June. We waited until the sun went down and a dark moonless night took its place. I thanked the fact that the sky was overcast, blocking even that waning moonlight. I watched and waited. A series of attacks flared against the shield and I saw it start to fade. Quickly I got into position and lowered the fortress onto the dock. The shield was already going back up before I sat down. The enemy had also noticed, and a flurry of attacks had come in to try and take advantage of the temporary weakness. Even from the distance, I could hear the booms of the monocannons as the energy impacted the wall of the city. The night lit up as fire was returned from our side. Fiona was already out the door as I shut everything down. I hurried after her to find Martin and Ska. I'm sure they had one hell of a story to tell on why the guild was attacking now. We found Martin in the backup control center of all things. I found this fact worrying. Martin picked up on my unasked question as he glanced over. He motioned Fiona and me to follow as he moved to an empty room and let the technicians keep monitoring the city's defenses. I'm glad the two of you are back. I wish I could have greeted you with better news, but as you can see we are in a bit of a situation. Before you ask, Paul, the main control room was destroyed by saboteurs and Kurt. Kurt? I asked, my blood beginning to boil. Hold up, Martin said, motioning for me to calm down. He was partially under the influence of some magical drug the saboteurs slipped him, but thorough questioning of our captives revealed it only worked on people that already had thoughts along those lines. In the end, I couldn't reason with the guy, and time was critical. I told everyone else the saboteurs killed him. My rage slowly subsided at the news that Kurt was dead. Instead, I focused on these captives. Martin must have noticed my interest. We are holding them for now. We had hoped to use them as hostages, but their worth seems to mean little to Lord Victi. So it is the guild? I inquired. Martin nodded. It started 2 weeks back. He told me the story of the meeting, and shortly after the spies showed up and started causing problems around town. That there had been 4 but 2 were killed while trying to capture them. The other 2 were cooperating reluctantly, but their cooperation had saved the city from major damage. The attack had come only 2 days after the spies were captured. Martin had rushed to the backup command center to activate the shield just as the first attacks hit the city. He didn't say how many were dead, but I could tell by his drawn face that there were casualties from the attack. What about the bodies on the plateau? I asked. Martin snorted at that. I went outside and waved the white flag, drew the cocky bastards close to the walls, and had our forces release a bit of revenge. We've been under siege since. I don't think their leader was dumb enough to come personally, as they are too well commanded. I lowered my voice. You know the shield won't last forever. I built it tough and it feeds off the spells that splash against it, but eventually they will realize this and stop attacking until it runs out of power. Martin nodded gravely. I had hoped you would return and help come up with a plan, or help drive them off. I don't think driving them off is gonna work. From what I was able to see, they have mobile dome shields protecting their forces and they are rotating troops out each day. And I doubt their shields are any weaker than ours. Martin groaned tiredly at hearing this news. It's not all gloom and doom, buddy. I might have an idea, but I'm gonna need a few things to test it out. If it saves the city, I'm all for it. What do you need? I relayed a list of materials I would need to build the device I was picturing. I hadn't ever built anything like it, but the principle was sound. The biggest hurdle was getting Mithril and someone to hand over a normal enchanted item. The second part turned out to be the easiest, as Martin handed me a bunch of enchanted weapons they had taken off the prisoners. There was also a limited supply of Mithril gathered from hunting the elementals. I hoped it was enough. I got to work laying out the prototype. The overall design was simple. The runes would slowly siphon off the energy used to empower enchanted items. The range was limited on the prototype to only a few feet. But that was fine. It didn't take long for me to carve the runes and the design. It was almost a reverse of what I had done with the slave collar Fiona had been saddled with. Back then I just overloaded it by preventing the capacitor, for lack of a better term, from discharging. It quickly caused the weak magical item to fail. I had pondered using that same method here, but I didn't want to hurt anyone inside the city that might have enchanted items. With this method, the items would eventually recharge on their own when the field was turned off. I set the finished block of runic script on the table and laid out the enchanted items Martin had given me, along with some of my old mana cannons. I arrayed them around the device and set them at a foot, 5 feet, and 10 feet to test field strength. With that done, I flipped the device on. Almost immediately the weak mana hearts began to glow as they absorbed power from the items. I had to shut it off after only a minute, as it hadn't been designed to constantly absorb power. I quickly checked the items to see if anything changed. The closest dagger no longer included the magical description it had held before. I didn't know if it had broken or what. I moved on to the mana cannon next, finding the once fully charged mana heart had been completely drained of its charge. So it acted differently on items that took external charge vs having an internal charge like the daggers or my runic staff. I did check my weapons as well and found them unaffected by the field. My runic mana laser wasn't unaffected though, being drained similarly to the normally enchanted one. With a horrible thought, I checked my dimensional storage rings and found them unaffected by my device. I heaved a sigh of relief, as that could have ended very poorly for me if they had been affected. I still had no clue how the rings functioned, as they were far more different than any other enchanted item I had ever seen. My idea of rolling up with all our artillery and blasting them to bits after their items lost charge was also off the table. The next row showed the enchanted item had a new status called depleted on it. The enchanted mana cannon was at half charge and my runic variant was at 2/3 of a charge. So there was a bit of a difference. I quickly checked the last row and found the items barely affected. The enchanted weapon was still functional and the mana cannon had only lost 1/10 of its capacity. I noted down all my findings and put the items away while I did some math. Chapter 178, Drained. You sure this will work? Martin asked worriedly. No, I responded while I positioned the large cube full of runes into place below the teleportation scrambler. You could have at least lied to me, Martin grumbled. And what good would that have done, Besides, the test worked fine, the only concern I have is distance. But I have a solution for that as well. Fair point. Can you activate it separately from the shield? For now, no, but if I had a few more days I could rig up a separate control for the drainer, I replied. That is a terrible name, Ska said. I'll leave the cool naming up to you and Martin, I added, grunting as I squeezed past the massive block that took up most of the room in the small attic space. I heard Martin groan and Ska croon happily. I chuckled. Are we ready? I asked. Martin flicked on his little two-way radio and talked with the guards. Everyone is in position and ready in case they attack. Ska, could you join the wall guards? Very well, give me 3 minutes, he hissed happily before zooming down the stairs. Glad to see someone is enjoying themselves, I stated. I think part of it has to do with that catkin we captured. I hope he's smart enough not to get involved with someone like that, Martin sighed. You're planning on releasing them? Not exactly. The only other choices are to kill them or keep them locked up indefinitely, but that poses its own issue. But I can't do that either, not without a trial and exposing what Kurt did. I could lock them in slave collars, but I imagine you might take issue with that, Martin added flatly. You're probably right, but then again I would just kill them. If only it were that easy. I may be the mayor, but I have to follow the law as well. There would have to be a trial. And the law states they have to have killed someone by their hands to be punished by death or imprisonment. We can only really prove that one of them killed. Besides, we don't have the types of facilities to hold people for an extended time. Sounds like a shitty law. Who agreed to that? I grunted in annoyance. The people of the city. Obviously, it wasn't designed to take magic into account. I plan on having a vote to change some aspects of the law, but for now, that's what we have. Besides, they can't return to Lord Victi or the guild because I plan on telling the guild just how cooperative they were in blunting the guild's attack. That leaves them only a few options. Most likely they will request to work for us. Of course, I will get a magically binding contract to enforce their cooperation, but it's a start. Besides, we need more people with their skill set, no matter how distasteful I find it. I mulled over what Martin was saying. He was right, of course. To win the game you had to play it. I refused to play the game. It's probably why I kept finding myself in shitty situations. Hopefully, the guild would back off after learning we had the ability to render all enchanted items useless. I doubted it though. It wasn't like with the Stygian Order. They were a purely Earth-based organization that operated in small cells of operatives. At least that was the impression I got from my dealings with them so far. The guild was a multi-universe spanning organization of incalculable wealth and power. I doubt they would completely give up, but their activities would be more circumspect. For now, that would have to suffice. I think it's time, Martin shouted up to me. All right, here goes nothing, I said, plugging in the last connection. I had to avert my eyes as the massive mana heart I put together for this project radiated a blinding glow before the energy slowly bled off and into the shield around the city. I had to blink away the after images before I walked over and climbed down the ladder. Holy shit! Martin said, you sure that crystal will hold? It should, the capacity is nearly 10,000 mana. He whistled, yeah, we definitely need to send a caravan down to, what did you say the city was called? Huron, I said, rubbing away the rest of the blindness. Yeah, definitely going to need more stones, Martin muttered as he stared up at the still bright glow coming from the attic. I sealed up the hatch and removed the ladder. The entryway vanished into the ceiling, hidden by another runic array. Come on, let's get to the walls to see how the enemy responds to this latest change. Martin nodded as we made our way down the stairs and through the destroyed command center of the central tower. I had to fight back the urge to punch something at seeing the damage and dried blood, all because of that fucking idiot Kurt. Even if what Martin said was true, the man was such a spineless tool, the least he could have done is get himself killed instead of trying to get the entire town sacked. Commander Ashlam, we have a problem, one of his subordinates said as he entered the command tent. Well, spit it out, what problem, he demanded. Sir, our siege weapons are losing charge and the mages are having to constantly refill them. So, why are you bringing this to me? He stated flatly, get the scribes to diagnose the issue and fix it. When the man didn't immediately leave, Ashlam got upset. Well, go. Sir, we already had the scribes inspect the weapons and they are functioning properly. They can't find any issue with the weapons. Fine, assign 2 mages per cannon and keep the rate of fire up. The enemy's shield can't hold out forever, now go, before I get angry, Ashlam ordered. The man bowed and left the tent. Ashlam mulled over the issue. It was obviously something within the city causing this. Ashlam didn't believe in coincidence, and the city's shield dropping less than a day ago before coming right back up meant someone had likely entered the town. Probably the same man Lord Victi had been looking for. He didn't know what was causing this issue, but he would send someone back to notify Lord Victi about this latest situation. It doesn't seem to be working, Martin said quietly, making sure nobody else could hear his doubts. No, I think it was. You said they fired at regular intervals but it slowed for a time. They must be on the far end of the effect. I need to increase the range. I know you said you could do that, but how? You remember those sensors I built? I asked, stepping from the wall and walking back toward the command room. Yeah, but I thought those were for detecting incoming and outbound teleports. Well, that was true of the original ones, but I added a few features to the newer ones. They were designed to interface with the city defenses. Other than the shield, they can enhance the teleportation scrambling field, and I suspect also the area of coverage that the drainer encompasses. You're sure? Martin asked skeptically. Well, I'm sure it will help, but I doubt it will extend the range very far. The devices aren't really designed to handle massive amounts of incoming energy, so I will have to limit their field strength until I can build more robust units. Is there a chance they will burn out from this power? Possibly, but we can have Fiona deploy replacements. I'm not sure I like that plan, Martin added quietly. It's either that or disable the shield so I can fly the fortress out. But I'm not sure I could do that with the drainer active either. The mana hearts aren't immune to the draining effect. Fine, let's hope this crazy plan works. If it does, I owe you a beer. Deal, I said, walking into the unassuming house that held the backup command room. I had to chase away one of the techs as I rapidly twisted some knobs to align the sensor network for this purpose. A few of the sensors went offline due to overload, but thankfully they were on the north side of the town. All the ones on the east side held, and I let out a breath. All right, that should do it. Ashlam was interrupted as a messenger ran in, panting and wide-eyed. Commander, all of the cannons are offline. Ashlam slammed his fist into the table. Damn it, what are you buffoons doing out there? I thought I said to double up the mages. The messenger seemed to shrink before choking out a reply. We did, Commander. We even increased it to 3 per cannon. But they are unable to keep up with the drain the weapons are receiving. Ashlam ground his teeth in frustration and stood up. That's not all, some of our enchanted gear has started to break down. What? Ashalm pulled out the sword gifted to him by his lord. Titan's Might. Quality, exquisite. Damage, 20 to 30 slashing, 15 to 25 stabbing. Drained. Ashlam's grip went white when he saw his sword was missing the enchantment. Send a message back to Lord Vic T and pull our forces back until the effect wanes. I want to know how far this extends. The man nodded hastily and ran out of the tent. Ashlam walked out shortly after. Pack up the tent. When the enemy stopped firing, it was the first good sign we had received. The second was when they began to pull back deeper into the forest. Martin slapped me on the back. Guess I owe you a beer. You think they will have to pull back outside their range? Most likely, the mana cannons have a limited range of effective fire, but even then the mana dissipates quickly. It's probably why they weren't able to breach the shield so far. Most of the energy was lost due to how far they had to fire from. My modified weapons don't suffer as much from that limitation, but they also aren't as powerful. Alright, I need to get the men rotated out for sleep, but for now we will leave the shield up. It was as I predicted. The majority of the enemy pulled back and started firing again, but quickly realized their shots were dissipating before they hit the shield. They had to pull back even farther though, as the teleportation scrambler was blocking them from leaving. I thought it served them right to have to walk through dense forest for a bit after what they pulled. I knew they would be back, but it would take them time to come up with a way around this newest hurdle. Until then we would need to build up our resources. We also needed to take care of a problem to the west. With this naked aggression from the guild, it wasn't safe to leave Houston in the hands of the guild. I know Martin and Fiona had warned me against attacking directly, but things changed. I would discuss the issue with them before going, but I would still go and deal with it personally. Maybe Ska would like to accompany me. I imagined he might find the thought of revenge quite enjoyable. Chapter 179, Cold War. It took a week, but the enemy eventually pulled back all of their forces from within the forest. They couldn't afford to leave even spotters inside the draining field. At least not if they wanted to keep them alive. Even stealth-based classes were severely limited by the teleportation scrambler, as it prevented skills like what Martin told me that Katkin was capable of using. The only reason Fiona was immune to this effect was due to her being spiritual. I had thought of coming up with a way to block spiritual entry, but I liked having a way in again if shit hit the fan a second time. I knew it was only a matter of time until the guild showed their face again. Now that the guild knew we had a way to disable their main advantage, they would be furiously trying to figure out how we did it. I suspected more infiltrators would be hired. Martin had agreed with my assessment and was pushing hard on the 2 they captured to try and turn them to our side. I still didn't like the idea of letting 2 former enemies roam free, but I couldn't deny how useful they might be. It was also why I wasn't considering asking Fiona to accompany me back to Houston when that plan kicked off. She had the highest probability of stopping those 2 if things turned bad, but she would also make for a great spy. As for everything else, well, I adjusted Maria's route. She was still out on her current one and would only return in a few days. It was pure luck she had left only hours before the city was sieged. The other barge and captain had been stuck behind the force field like everyone else. I didn't even know the man's name and didn't bother learning it. Charles was now in charge of running the operations there. When I got the third barge up and running, I would simply hand him the activation key and he would hire someone on to train with one of the other captains. I had decided on this course of action for a few reasons. One, I didn't want to be bogged down running a business and I wasn't willing to stick around all the time. With my upgrades to the city, it could now weather a siege, similar to the previous one, for months on end. The reason for that was the ability for the shield to passively recharge by absorbing minute amounts of energy from any enchanted device within range. Before, it had to have energy directed at the barrier to absorb it. It wasn't perfect and it could be overwhelmed or depleted if enemies learn it of the trick, but it was certainly better than the previous iteration. It also made me realize I really needed to upgrade the fortress. The thing had never been designed for assault, being more a safe home for me and my friends at the time. But it had suffered significant damage during more than one battle. I had to debate on whether or not to rebuild the original or start from scratch though. Rebuilding it would certainly speed things up, but I didn't think it would be a significant improvement. In the end, I decided to start from scratch, not because I didn't think the fortress could be repurposed, but because what I wanted to build was simply so different that it would render most of the old components useless. It would take weeks to strip the fortress of the mithril and resmelt it, but that was fine. I also had to purchase more mithril from the city anyway. At least this way it would cost less overall. The cost would still be astronomical, but I had recently learned that I was filthy stinking rich due to all the trade and building my employees had done while I was away. I decided they all deserved a raise in pay, so I simply doubled it. Martin had already contracted with the earth mages that worked for me to build a second defensive wall around the first and to help rebuild the wall around the destroyed farming area. That was fine with me. I guess in my absence Charles had found another 3 earth mages to hire on. The company never really had a name, so I left it to Charles to pick it. He chose SJ Contractors. I shrugged. One name was as good as another. I did get the option upon company creation to divvy up funding as I saw fit. I set it to 50% of the profit for myself and the rest for the company to spend as it saw fit. I still had access to all expenditures via a new tab in my menus, so stealing from the company was practically impossible. Not that I thought Charles would do that. He had the best of both worlds, good pay and the ability to run the company as he saw fit. And none of the downsides like being liable as an owner. "Hey, Charles, how are things?" I asked as I stepped inside the warehouse. "Going good. I didn't expect you today. Did you have a project for us?" "Geez, am I that transparent?" I asked, chagrined. "Sorta. But in a good way. Everyone knows what you've done for the city and you always bring some of the most interesting puzzles." "Alright, well, nothing too fancy today. I just need a large quantity of high-grade metal." The man said, rubbing his chin. "How much and what do you consider high-grade?" "I would love titanium if you can source enough, but I will settle for high-grade steel used for boats." "Planning on building a ship?" "Something like that," I replied. "Well, we're looking at tons of material then. If this was just Earth supplying the resources, I might say you were sold, but with the bazaars, it's much easier to source a large volume of either of those two. They aren't exactly sought-after metals when you have things like mithril and other magical metals. Buying up that much might tip our hand in Nashville though. We are barely skirting around the Mohe as it is. They are getting suspicious of our activities in the area. There is another bazaar in Chicago, but if you go up that far, take precautions. There were scattered combatants in that area the last time I went through. If that doesn't work out, I have a merchant friend that I trust. I can give you his contact information. He won't turn down making a profit this large. He might even be able to get all of the metal for you." Charles whistled. "Well, that will certainly make things quicker. When do you need it by and how many tons of material?" "Let's try for 100 tons. It's more than I need, but I have ideas for the additional materials. Forgive me if I'm stepping out of line here, but if you are building a vessel, why not just repurpose one of the docked ships in Houston?" I had actually thought of doing that, but I was sick of working around existing limitations, plus an ocean-going ship would never work properly for what I had in mind. "No, that's a good question. I thought about doing that, but it would take more work to retrofit them than starting from scratch. I will need more welders though, so see if you get like another 5. Make Timothy the foreman in charge of them. See if you can get the materials within a month. By then I should have the design I have in mind finalized." "Alright, that sounds doable. We will need to purchase welding rod and other materials to construct this vessel. If you want a dry dock built, we are going to need preliminary designs sooner rather than later. I nodded. Put a wall up around the other warehouse lot, there should be enough space over there for what I have in mind. All right, I will have the 2 new guys get started on it right away. I left the building, leaving the man to wonder at what I was planning to build. I didn't entirely know myself. Sure, I had a vague idea and a list of requirements floating around my head, but getting them all down so a construction crew could build what I wanted would take some doing. I also had to strip the fortress. I decided to start on that first. It would be sad to see the thing go, as it had served quite well for what it was, but it was no longer suitable for what I needed anymore. I needed a projection of strength to deter any that thought I or this new vessel were weak. Ashlam remained kneeling below Lord Vict's throne. To say the man had been angry at his retreat was an understatement. Lord Victi hadn't blown up or shown his displeasure so openly, but he expressed his anger in other ways. One of those ways was going on at this very moment, and Ashlam had remained in this position for 4 hours waiting for his lord to respond to his report. There was a click as Lord Victi tapped on the arm of his throne. You are certain that the city developed something to drain enchanted items? Ashlam raised his head. Yes, we have multiple instances of items with the drain tag. Some were even outright broken by whatever our enemy used, but that seemed to only affect lesser items. The higher quality ones eventually recovered. Still, that news is disturbing in and of itself, but you also mentioned the cannons. Yes, my lord, the mages were having problems keeping the weapons fully charged. We could overcome this problem by having more mages per cannon, but it was slowing down our rate of fire. They are also blanketing the area with a teleportation scrambler of a strength I have never witnessed. It forced us to travel beyond sight of the city in order to teleport. Yes, another troubling development. What of their shields? They aren't ordinary shields, it seems they got a hold of siege shields. But they did drop them for a period of time. I believe this was when our main target returned to the city. Oh, and why do you believe that? Lord Victi asked. The timing is too close to be a coincidence. It was only a day after that incident that our items started having issues. Plus we managed to damage more infrastructure while the shield was down. There is no reason to risk something like that unless it was critical to their survival. I agree with you on that. Very well, keep long-distance watchers on the city for now. I will get approval to move forward with a strike team. I would prefer to capture this Paul Fuller alive if possible, his inventions are just too unique to let him go to waste. And if that turns out to be impossible? Lord Victi shrugged. Nothing is impossible with enough funding behind it. I removed the last of the mithril pathways from the fortress and wiped the sweat from my forehead. The extensive deconstruction work had taken me 2 full days of back-breaking labor. I couldn't ask anyone for help because everyone was still on alert in case the enemy forces decided to return. I knew Fiona was out watching them from a distance and Ska was helping patrol near the city, but other than that I was out of the loop. I'll be honest, I much preferred that, to being in charge and having to make the life or death decisions for an entire town. I didn't know how Martin did it. Speaking of Martin, I spotted him walking down the dock toward the remaining hunk of stone that used to be a fortress. It's kind of sad to see it in this state, Martin said, looking at the remains of the fortress. We did have some interesting times in it. Hard to believe it was only a few months. Yeah, things are changing so rapidly it's hard to keep up sometimes. But I didn't come to see you just to reminisce. Oh. What do you want, Paul? Martin asked pointedly. Hey. I asked in confusion. When we met, you had a goal to destroy the Black Dragon. You finally accomplished that goal, and since then you have been kind of just meandering along with no real purpose. I found my purpose in helping run a city. Fiona found her purpose, protecting those she loves and starting a family. Hell, even Ska found a purpose by defending the innocent. But you haven't. It makes us worry about you. I was silent for a minute, a bit shocked and a bit confused. Maybe a bit angry too. To protect you guys. Martin shook his head. Paul, we don't need protection, not anymore. Sure, we are thankful for everything you have done for us, but that's a goal that no longer exists either. The 3 of us are stronger than most people we have met. I would give even odds that Fiona or Ska could single-handedly fight off anyone in the guild they choose to send our way. I may not be there yet, but I can certainly hold my own. I realized he was right. I had been so focused on getting them stronger, making them safer, that I lost focus on what I wanted. I sat down on the ramp as I contemplated the question. Nobody is saying you have to leave or decide today, Martin added quietly, just think about it. Did Fiona ask you to talk with me? She brought it up but I saw the truth in her words. I'm not like you or the others, I said simply. Staying in one place this long makes me antsy ever since I was a slave. Martin nodded. There is a whole great big world out there to explore. Perhaps that is your calling. But how can I just leave when there are enemies right here? There are always going to be enemies, Paul. You can't fight everyone. Chapter 180, What Drives Me? After my conversation with Martin, which left me feeling like a stray dog kicked to the street, even though I knew Martin meant well, I thought long and hard about what he said. He was right, of course. I had lost most of my drive since defeating the Black Dragon. Sure, I still had the Stygian Order as a driving force, but they were more a nuisance than anything else. And the guild wasn't something I would ever be able to defeat, and that irked me. I only struck back at the Stygian Order as payback for the shitstone pulled in Houston and way back in Chicago. And now I was going back to my old habits of retaliation by building something specifically designed to kick the guild in the teeth in Houston. Well, not them per se, but their lapdog Edward Rose will. Eventually, I decided on a course of action. It was a hard decision to come to, but I felt it was the right one. First, I would get help dealing with Houston. Once we secured the city again, I would bring Ska back to St. June, then I was off. I wanted to see what this world truly had to offer, and if it was larger than Jupiter when everything was smashed together, I could spend the rest of my life exploring and still not see everything there was. I admit finding a purpose again was exciting. I now had something other than revenge to look forward to. Sure, I would run into enemies along the way, but I would find new friends as well. And I could always return to St. June when I needed a friendly face. 2 months went by quickly as Charles and SJ contractors gathered the materials and helped build the ship. The guild had only left a few people to watch the city, but they made no move to get close, making it easy to build the ship without them knowing. Titanium was not as easy to source as we had hoped, but we found enough to use as armor plating. After it was compressed with earth magic, we were left with 1-inch thick plates that had originally been 4 inches thick. The rest of the superstructure was made from compressed steel bracing with holes punched in them to remove as much weight as possible. The 1/4-inch thick beams looked flimsy but were as strong, if not stronger, than thick steel I-beams. Mesh grating was laid down as flooring, and the interior walls were formed from hollow aluminum tubing as they weren't structural. It gave the ship a very Spartan aesthetic, but that was fine. I could liven it up on my travels. I'll be honest, I didn't know shit about building an actual ship. Not that anyone could say they knew how to build a flying ship. The end result was something that might be classified as a small corvette in tonnage and only measured 45 meters from bow to stern. It was smaller than most yachts. That was where the resemblance ended. Unlike a normal ship with a sharp V-shaped hull, my ship had a much more shallow bottom. The design was a bit of a compromise as it was hard to shape compressed titanium, so flat plates were used anywhere we could. The end result looked extremely menacing and reminded me of the stealth ship designs that were starting to be built around the world before everything went to shit. The top of the ship was almost completely flat except for an angular protrusion near the back that rose up 4 feet off the deck. I had wanted to leave it all flat, but design and material constraints required that I add it in. At least it wasn't useless. The hump provided 3 main purposes. One was an angled hatch that faced forward and allowed entrance to the top deck. Another was a larger rear surface area for the propulsion runes, giving just a bit more speed. And the last was an elevated mount for a ball turret. The ball turrets were my favorite bit of design that I implemented. The top-mounted one sported 4 of my modified monolasers in a square configuration. There were 3 more ball turrets on the top of the ship. One on either side at the midpoint of the vessel and hanging slightly off the sides like tumors. This gave them the ability to fire at a 45-degree angle downward. Then there was the forward-mounted gun. Unlike the side ones, it was set back from the front a few feet. Those 3 turrets were triple-barrel configurations of standard monocannons that were designed by me. They weren't quite as powerful as the guild's cannons, but with 3 firing as either a burst or alternating, it was a withering barrage. I had decided to add those types of cannons because they offered more explosive impact versus my penetrating impact of the monolasers. There weren't any turrets along the sides of the hull, mostly because it would have been overkill if I had included them. Targets were likely to be below me or above me, and I could tilt the ship or raise and lower it to bring them in line with my weapons. That brings me to the bottom-mounted weapons. These were trickier to build as I did want the ship to be able to float, so there couldn't be any open seams. I had toyed with the idea of making floating gun platforms that could be released, but controlling them all from one terminal proved impossible in my tests. So I modified the top-mounted ball turrets slightly. The turrets were half-spheres that would flip open when needed, when not in use they would flip closed, leaving the underside smooth and flat. The barrels like the ones at the top of the ship would slide along a central channel and the ball itself could rotate 180 degrees allowing the turrets to fire at any angle I desired. This was only possible due to the weirdness of magic. If the turrets were electrically operated it would not have worked. The bottom of the ship sported 8 turrets. 4 quad-barrel monolaser turrets and 4 triple-barrel monocannons. The cost in Mithril alone was staggering and I did have to pull from SJ's coffers to purchase the last of it. Charles was a bit grumpy about the loss of capital but he was happy once he saw what it went toward. Was it overkill and ridiculous? Maybe, but some of the monsters and people I had come across couldn't be dismissed easily. Besides, firing all of the weapons at one time would probably deplete most of the core. Speaking of the core, I had taken the 3 separate mana hearts used in the fortress and fused them into a massive crystal. It was housed securely in an armored cabin, inside the control center of the ship, which itself was thickly armored. If anything hit that, I was screwed, so better safe than sorry. I had decided to go with 1 crystal instead of separate ones due to the mana gathering array I built inside that room. It was similar to the drainer but pulled from ambient mana instead of items or other mana hearts. It wouldn't be very good if my weapons kept running out of juice while I tried to power them. The control center had 4 seats, a throwback to the fortress, but I would control everything from a single console. And boy, what a control room it was! I had utilized some advanced runic techniques to implement this next piece of tech but the end result was amazing. Like with my helmet, the entire interior of the room could be made see-through. The only things not affected were the small areas around each rotating station. Apparently floating on nothing made most people sick to their stomachs. Cleaning that up wasn't much fun, but that wasn't the only feature of this new command bridge. With a special pair of glasses, I could target anything with a visual indicator like a crosshair. It couldn't compensate for wind or fall off, but I would figure those out on my own and adjust the settings later. The glasses were a temporary thing meant for testing and eventually, I was going to just tattoo the runes over my other eye. The final feature of the bridge was the ability to zoom in, like an enormous telescope. It was much more useful than the top-down view the remote viewing device gave me. I still kept that though, as there were blind spots on the ship and it would help prevent me from missing something. I poured all of my knowledge and improvements into this ship. Gone were the simple defensive systems I had employed before. I built a runic program to determine if an object was a friend or foe and determine the best way to deal with the threat. I couldn't really call it AI, as it was magic-based and wasn't even as complex as some of the operating systems Earth had been using before the system, but it was a step above my previous kludged-together system. I couldn't even say the idea was original. I came up with it after mulling over that homunculus and those weird cleaning golems I purchased. I figured if something like that could be autonomous, why couldn't the ship's systems operate that way? The ship was essentially a partial golem. I didn't give the control systems full autonomy as that would be dangerous. Plus it is a completely untested system, there may be changes I had to make. The control systems were new but the ship still sported shields and the ability to cloak, but the shields were upgraded to be twice as strong as before. I couldn't go beyond that or the system would drain too quickly. The cloak was only improved through energy usage and I now added a third system called active camouflage that deployed a simple illusion spell. The computer would determine the surroundings and try to mimic them as closely as possible. It wasn't a perfect solution. I had spent 2 weeks trying to get it to function properly at all. It looked okay at 100 feet or more. Any closer and it was a dead giveaway that something was off. But the illusion could be maintained indefinitely for just the original mana cost. So there was no more worrying about the mana heart running dry while I'm off gallivanting away from the ship. The last big upgrade was the propulsion. My techniques and skill had improved to the point where I was able to increase the speed by 20% and the lift by 30%. It may not seem like much, but the ship was less than half the weight of the fortress and that fat bastard was capable of flying at 40 miles an hour. I figured I could fly at almost 80 now, due to having fewer thrusters but being more streamlined. And my altitude could now reach 1,000 feet, doubling what the fortress was capable of. Most of that was thanks to the larger bottom surface area. This was all theory though, as I hadn't finished installing all the systems. I also hadn't named the vessel yet, deciding a launch ceremony was in order for something this monumental. I hadn't only spent my time on the ship though, no, I had a surprise for Martin and the city. I smiled thinking about his reaction when he saw it. It took a few more weeks to get everything installed into the ship, which I had named Retribution because that was what would happen if anyone fucked with it. Charles had done an outstanding job of decorating the dry dock for the occasion and colored ribbons flapped in the breeze off the ocean. A gaggle of people had come to see and tour the craft. I let it happen, suppressing my annoyance at having people I hardly knew aboard. Martin said it would help my image, not that I cared about that, but I did it for him and the others. It wasn't like they would learn anything from it. The systems were offline, and other than the turrets at the top of the ship, everything else was artfully hidden behind armor plates or runes. In some cases both. I gotta say, I think you outdid yourself with this beast, Martin said, clapping me on the shoulder. You should see it when it's in battle mode, I whispered. Oh, I can only imagine, he chuckled. When is the first trip? Well, shakedown cruise today. Then fix any issues that crop up. So probably next week. Oh, that's soon. Anything I should be aware of? My goal has always been to retake Houston. But I can't do that alone. I sent a message out to Marshal Sumner to see if he wants his city back. If not, I'll just decapitate the snake and be on my way. Martin didn't look too happy at my pronouncement. I wish you would reconsider, but I know you are set on this path. It's not good to be surrounded by enemies, I said with a shrug. Besides, it's time you get your alliance back on track. That would be nice. Trade is starting to falter and reports are coming in from Nashville that our traders are being turned away. It seems like someone figured out they were working for you. I nodded. It was bound to happen sooner or later. At least there is Huron, and with the improvements, I added to the barges, they can get there and back in 2 months. I chatted with a few other people as the spectators all toured the ship, and eventually everyone walked off and sat in the stands to witness the christening of the vessel. I watched Martin step up to a podium. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this monumental day. For so long we have been scrabbling just to survive this new world, living off scraps and making do with what was available. But no more. Martin pointed behind him at the gleaming metal ship. This is proof that humanity is past the point of simply surviving. We are now capable of building and growing, of taking on the threats around us. And this was one man, we are so much more together. With our bond, we will persevere and carve a nation anew. There was a standing ovation as Martin nodded to the gathered crowd and released the bottle of champagne someone had found against the bow of the ship. For our future, he shouted, and the crowd joined him. I wanted to slip away from the attention, but Fiona eyed me from beside Martin. I sighed and stuck around for the back-patting and handshakes that followed. Ska was here as well, but he was on security duty for the party, so didn't have to play nice.